Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we interview leaders from around the world on subjects such as leadership, expertise, diversity, and how to be heard, how to make your mark in the world. Before I go into today's guest, Patricia Murillo, I'd like to invite you to see where your presentation skills are strong by taking our free assessment at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where you are strong and where your presentation skills are strong, and where perhaps a little bit of support could help you get the results you need and the recognition you deserve. My guest today is Patricia Murillo, and we are recording this in order to play it during Hispanic and Latinx Leadership Month. So it's mid-September to mid-October. But really what I do is I bring in experts who happen to fit the group that I'm highlighting that week, but are truly experts. And Patricia is one of them. I've known her for some years, and she is now the Chief Learning Officer for How Women Lead, which is an organization I've spoken about many times on this podcast. She brings over 25 years of progressive nonprofit leadership experience, effectively leading organizations and initiatives to greater impact. Patricia is passionate about designing and facilitating people-centered learning experiences. With a background in education, social work, and organizational development, she has worked on equity and social justice issues throughout her career. As a first-generation Latina who came up from working the fields in Watsonville, California, she has been on a mission to provide support and opportunities for marginalized communities and to give back to the many hands that uplifted her throughout her education and career. Most recently, Patricia served as the Chief Program Officer for the Center for Volunteer and Nonprofit Leadership. She's been a consultant to diverse organizations and projects, training corporate partners on nonprofit board governance, facilitating strategic and long-range planning processes, and organizational development, including culture and equity and inclusion initiatives. Patricia was the executive director of Alternatives in Action, where she expanded the programs and the scope and served as the senior director of program services for the Boys and Girls Clubs of San Francisco. She's an awesome expert. She has really wonderful things to say. And we really talked about what you learn and how you learn from your mistakes, which was what I did when I started out my leaders. I wish I had known Patricia when I first ran an opera company. It would have helped me a lot. I know you'll enjoy the conversation. Let's go to the interview with Patricia Murillo. Patricia Murillo, welcome to Speakers Who Get Results.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. It's great to be here.
Well, it's really fun to have you. This month, we're celebrating Latino, Latina, Latinx leaders, all those L's there. And I said, oh, good. I knew I was going to find a time to interview you on the podcast. So I'm really glad to have you here. Before I get into my long list of questions for you, who would be your dream interview? If you were to interview somebody who's not with us anymore, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
Oh, that's a great question. Would say Chavela Vargas. So Chavela Vargas was a very respected with a long tenure musician, Mexicana. And she was also a very butch lesbian. She was performing as early as the 40s, 50s, and would dress as a man. And so for me, as I think about, gender, and certainly as a Latina within Mexico, the gender norms can be pretty rigid. And so for her boldness to do that and to just be so clear about who she was and unapologetic, and she certainly paid some costs for that, but just
Yeah.
what an incredible human being.
Well, didn't she had a famous affair with Tallulah Bankhead, I think.
Yeah, the one that always catches my eyes, she's rumored to have had an affair with Frida Kahlo.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah, just incredible.
Well, I think I remember seeing something about her in Acapulco. So, and all the Hollywood stars would fly down there, and basically everybody slept with everybody.
Yeah.
And she had a lot of notches on her belt, as the old saying goes. And then she came back as in her older years,
Yeah.
as an elder, and her career was reborn.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, she struggled, and this is the personal cost, I think, of keeping identities hidden and all of what I'm sure she struggled with. But she was struggled with alcoholism for a very long time. It took a huge toll on her health, and it had significant years of recovery. And that is one of the reasons she was able to actually come back and reclaim her music and have like a second, third chapter, I think, to her career. She died at 93 in
Yeah.
2012. So
Right. There's a good movie all about her that's the name of which I can't remember. But when you mentioned Chavela Vargas, I said, oh, I remember that. We went to go see it. So tell me, Patricia, tell me what you are doing now. You've done a lot of things.
Yeah.
What are you doing now? And let's talk into why it matters.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. So my career has been solidly in the social impact sector. So I've been 30 plus years working in the nonprofit space, very much centering around social justice and equity, mostly in education. I am currently the Chief Learning Officer for How Women Lead. And How Women Lead is just doing tremendous things. They have a network of over 15,000 executive leaders across the country now. It's gone national in part as a result of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And they really strive on gender equity to create spaces for women to be first and foremost connected and cheerleading one another.
Yes.
And in that way, amplify impact and voice, in three areas. So they do a lot of work around corporate board leadership, knowing that if women are in those boardrooms, are leading companies, that outcomes on all sorts of things for organizations are much better. And then they do a lot of work around just general women's leadership. So everything from we have a leadership fellowship program called Women Leaders for the World, to lots of different kinds of opportunities for women to self-reflect and to level up their skills. And then lastly, they operate an investment fund called How Women Invest. And they do a lot of work around supporting women who maybe hadn't considered investment. Financial services can be incredibly male.
Yes.
Sometimes women have a harder time accessing what is relevant and useful for them. And so really supporting women to be able to understand more about investment, understand about the opportunities, and then to invest in some incredible companies.
And women founders, right?
Women founders. So How Women Invest is at this point, it's been the only investment fund that is only about investing in women companies. For me, again, the organization is really committed to centering women of color.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one of the pieces that I really love about the investment work is that the majority of the women that are investing are women of color. So over 50% of our investors, our LPs, are women of color, and close to 70% of the companies that are getting invested in are led by women of color. And we're in a situation less than 2% of dollars goes to women-led companies, period. So
Yes.
to be able to be actively making things happen in that space is really amazing.
What do you say to the people who say, well, we've got space for women. Okay, it's white women. Well, then, how do you expand that to women of color?
Yeah. Well, and I don't think, I mean, I think what I appreciate, Julie Castro Abrams, who's the CEO, she often says,
And I'll have to say that regular listeners of this podcast, Julie Castro Abrams is one of the first interviews I did, and she was my 100th interview. So go back through the list, and you'll find or search in the list on the podcast page to have two great interviews with Julie Castro Abrams.
Yeah. Yeah, she's pretty amazing. And she's pretty clear. I think her racial and gender analysis is very sharp. And one of the things that she often says is, and she will say, as a white woman who grew up middle class in the Midwest, my needs are going to get met. My needs are going to get met. But when we focus on what are the needs of, whether it's African American leaders, whether it's Latina leaders, when you center those experiences, then you're ensuring that more people's needs get met. So I think for me, that's the important piece. And Elizabeth, the reality is that we, for as much as diversity, equity, and inclusion gets talked about, we have not significantly moved the dial in this country, right?
Yeah.
So on gender,
yeah,
never mind on, the intersection of gender and race. So I think there's so much work that needs to be done. And, I also think that this idea that if the system isn't ready to move, then we're going to create our own system is something very powerful.
I think that's wonderful. Talk a little bit about the Latinas in Sight initiative, and that's in sight as like being visible.
Absolutely,
because one of the parts of the How Women Lead Credo is be unabashedly visible. And I will have a picture of the credo up in the show notes. Let's talk about this Latinas in Sight.
Yeah, well, it came to be, so we launched it about 6 months ago. And the focus was that we know the research shows us that Latinas, in spite having significant numbers demographically in this country, are the least represented in every leadership space. So I'm talking about in the corporate C-suite and boardroom, in the nonprofit C-suite executive team, leading up organizations and boardroom, philanthropic dollars that go to organizations that are run by Latinas or that center Latino communities. So in every single area, you can see that the representation issues are significant. So very much in keeping with our approach, which is that even the power of connecting high-level leaders to one another is going to cause something to shake out. We first and foremost, the commitment for Latinas Inside is that we're going to connect 1,000 senior Latina leaders to one another. And just by doing that, we know that, conversations are going to happen and opportunities are going to get raised up. Our hope is that against our programmatic pillars, which again is corporate boardrooms, social impact leadership, and investment, that we will be able to engage more Latina leaders to be thinking about how do they amplify opportunities in those spaces.
Why does it matter? Besides being good for society, what's the business case for making room for Latina leaders?
Well, first and foremost, if you are certainly in states and out of states where there are high Latino representation.
This is the US we're talking now.
In the United States. We know that the economic power of the Latino community is significant. And that if you are not integrating voices from everything to how employees make decisions about whether they're going to stay at a company or not, to what products are and in what way those products are getting put out into market, all of those things are much better with diverse representation. We know this. I mean, the research is clear about that. I think specifically around the Latina leadership case, there's all sorts of specific things that have to do with the way that Latina leadership shows up. It's more likely to be multiracial, for example. It's all more likely, Latinas are networkers. So you see all these other pieces of the puzzle that then creates, I believe, deeply more opportunities for more people. When those voices get shut out, which is what's happening now, there is again tremendous. This was why we chose the Latinas in Sight as the campaign message for this initiative, which is that Latinas are very much invisible. They do not. They're not identified in the pathway to leadership early enough. And oftentimes their opinions and perspective are not taken into account. So for those issues, we believe that putting a clear spotlight, one on the incredible number of Latinas just in the How Women Lead network that are causing tremendous things to happen, and then secondarily, just this amplifying effect of letting folks know that these are issues that need to be addressed.
I think that's wonderful. It's one of the reasons why I do so much work with How Women Lead. I love the community. Patricia, tell me about Women Leaders for the World and where that fits.
Yeah.
Not just Latinas.
Yeah, no, Women Leaders for the World is a one-year fellowship program operated by How Women Lead. And the fellowship, as someone who has participated when I was an executive director of a nonprofit in a number of different leadership development, I think this fellowship provides just so much support and connection for leaders. So the fellowship is focused on women who are leading up. So they're either nonprofit leaders, philanthropic leaders, social entrepreneurs, and they are leading up efforts in social impact. Usually they're, again, connected to an organization. They're the one or the number two in that organization. And what we know is that the nonprofit sector in general is under-resourced, but not unsimilar to what we know about corporate settings, the opportunities for women leaders to be able to scale up organizations, all of those things, to be able to have bigger mission impact, sometimes comes at a cost. The work for those leaders can be very isolative. We are seeing right now a huge gap in leadership in the nonprofit sector where it's hard to build executive leadership positions. And we also know there's a lot of research on nonprofit leadership that says that most executive directors will do it one time. They'll be an executive director one time, and then that's it.
They're burnt out. Yeah.
They're burnt out.
And so I ran a nonprofit for 11 years. I remember that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so did I, for exactly 11 years, Elizabeth. And I, often would feel like, for me, the calling to do this work. So I lead the facilitation, and it's one of the programs that I'm overseeing, is because if I had that kind of support, I know I would have been able to stay longer, been more strategic, been able to just do more. So the program is centered on how do we give leaders their own personal board of advisors, their own kitchen table board where they can go and break down some of that isolation. How do we give them access to bigger networks so that they can influence and be able to get what they need in terms of resources without having to struggle as much. And ultimately, it just creates this really beautiful community amongst the leaders, right? So that they can be with their peers in a different way. I think if you're an executive director, or even if you're a CEO, people in your organization, and not in a not necessarily in a bad way, but folks have an agenda. Your board has an agenda, your staff have an agenda. Everyone needs something from you. And so to be able to be in structured spaces where folks are there just to support you as a leader is pretty fantastic. So they get executive coaching. They get matched with 2 global advisors that are there to help them focus on a particular body of work. And then they get this really rich skill building and learning opportunities through webinars and all sorts of other development.
Can you tell us, give us an example? Because I know there's some very interesting stories, and it's women from all over the world, right?
And I think that's one of the things that's really magical about the program, that you're being able to talk with folks from all over the globe. We just had a graduation on Friday that was just beautiful. It was in this cohort, we had 18 leaders, about, I want to say there were 12 countries represented. We had 2 groups of folks come together. It was a virtual graduation, but they really wanted to be with one another. So they got together in person in DC. We had some folks who flew in from the UK. We had folks who came down from Canada. And then we had folks who got together in Lagos, came up from South Africa.
Nigeria, yeah.
And so that was just magical, just to see people making that commitment to be with one another. So it's a global leadership, and that's pretty much kind of the demographics, and any given cohort will have that level of diversity coming from all sorts of sectors. So we have, for example, one of the alums that is very close to my heart these days is Monica Manini. She was a director for an organization in Argentina called Catholics for the Rights of Women to Choose. And they were the backbone over 10 years, maybe more, of working in Argentina to get abortion legalized, which they did now 2 years ago. And so her campaign, they did a really interesting thing, Elizabeth, with visually, they had women, as they were, kind of demanding these rights, wear a green scarf. So you can see that green scarf now. When Mexico legalized, you saw it there. When Poland legalized, you saw that green scarf there. And right now in Texas, I just saw someone sent me a picture of a rally that was happening, and you see all these leaders wearing this green scarf.
Wow.
So again, to think about transnational movements, it's just really remarkable.
As a facilitator, I'm curious, what is it that you learn by working with these women?
Huge amounts. I feel like they, one of the things I think that I'm incredibly and consistently impressed by is people's persistence, sometimes in really tremendously challenging situations, just the persistence and focus on mission. And then I think the other piece is the generosity of folks to really extend to one another. And so I think that people are coming up with all sorts of creative solutions to what sometimes we hold as intractable problems. So that's the other piece. I think that the women that I get the opportunity to work with have tremendous vision. Sometimes they don't have the support that they need to be able to actualize that vision. But being able to support them to declare their vision and then to figure out how can we build some supports together. That's huge. I think about Rebecca Darwent, who's in Canada. She's one of our alums. her and a collective of Black, mostly women, had a vision of creating the first endowment for Black-led organizations in Canada. They secured $200 million
Wow.
from the Canadian government to make it so.
Wow.
Big vision for change. And so many of our leaders have that. So I think for me, one of the things that I'm trying to tussle with always is how to be able to create spaces to share the vision that these women leaders have for making change, because their solutions are really important, and we need to let more folks be able to hear about them.
What do tell us who the global advisors are and what they get out of this?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, the leaders get executive coaching, and we have a group of executive coaches that are ICF certified that work with them. But they also get these other relationships, and the global advisor part of the program. These are corporate, mostly corporate. There are women senior leaders that are in our network. Some of them are in social impact. Most of them are coming from the business sector, and they get matched with one of these leaders based on what the leader is needing, as well as what the global advisor's interest and specific skills and experience might be. And they make a commitment for a year. So over the course of that year, they provide technical assistance, they provide executive mentorship on a particular project. So all of the leaders have a 1-year fellowship project that they're working on. And so the global advisors are having an opportunity to work with someone with high vision, high commitment to social impact, who's trying to make something big happen in the world. So there's that, kind of basic altruism, right? That's getting fed by being a part of someone's narrative. But I think the other part for me that I've seen is that the global advisors are building up a different kind of skill set. They are being asked to mentor an executive leader in an organization that they're not usually familiar with, sometimes in countries that they're not familiar with. And nonprofits also just function differently than what you see in the private sector. And so they're having to kind of stretch and adapt, the way that they are able to provide this support. I think it helps to cultivate a very nuanced leadership development that really helps people to kind of build capacity to maybe be in a boardroom or maybe be in a different kind of role, because it's not hands-on at all. It's really about how do I support you and what you're trying to get done, and know that, I'm not going to get in there and fix it for you. I'm actually going to, try to stay in my a little bit of a consultative, support hat. So it's really fun. Some of those relationships have been just incredible to watch. We had 2 of our fellows were in Ukraine when the war broke out. They're both Ukrainian, and from different cohort years, their global advisors, and this has now been 3 to 4 years after the program had ended, their cohort year had ended. Those global advisors extended themselves. They were some of the first people that the fellows outreach to. One of the global advisors, as one of the leaders, both of them are now outside of Ukraine, was transitioning to Germany. Helped that leader get connected to some contacts in Germany to try to figure out, how she was going to get employed, because she left her company. So just these levels of support, I think that's really amazing. Real relationships over long periods of time.
It's the sort of thing that I wish I had known to ask for when I was running the opera company, because I did the classic thing, good girls don't ask for help. And that I was trying to do it all myself to a certain extent, where there was actually help available. I just didn't think I was allowed to ask for it. And it's one of the reasons why I left. I'm glad now that I did, because the work I do now combines everything I learned running an opera company. I might have left it. I might have left it with more money in the bank if I'd known how to ask for help. So, Patricia, tell me more. This is really one of the things that you and I have been talking about is the How Women Lead program, training women for boards. And one of the things, being a global advisor for women leaders for the world, is also training for a board.
Yeah.
Talk about that, please.
Yeah. Well, as I said, I think the needing as a global advisor and knowing that again, you have to learn a different system, sometimes in a different country very quickly. You have to create you have to build high relational trust with the leader that you're working with in order to be able to be effective. And then you have to deliver support in a way that isn't about you getting in there and doing it. So all those things are governance skills at the end of the day. They're being able to, like, how do you adapt your knowledge to different situations quickly, and how do you do it in a way that really requires high emotional intelligence to be able, again, to build that relationship connection, to build out your kind of area of focus, to be able to make an impact through someone else's leadership. So I think it's a really amazing way. You get so many benefits from it, of which, the relationship I always think of is the most valuable.
Yes.
But that nuanced skill, again, of adapting your skill and knowledge to be able to bring value to a completely different system, I think is a very important skill. I want to go back to something you said, Elizabeth, that I think is, someone said this to me many, many years ago, and it really has stayed with me, which is that men's leadership is always assumed and women's leadership is tentative. I think some of the ways that women leaders can isolate is about that, is that, there's so much pressure to show that you are, that
show that you're perfect.
Yeah.
That you're worth it.
Yeah. That you're, because it's tentative. And I think that's some of what we are still navigating. Very much so. And the ability to be able to ask for help, you have to have a level of trust and confidence that request isn't going to somehow indicate to someone that you that you're vulnerable, or that you're, so there's this,
you're not good enough if you don't know this piece.
Exactly. Yeah, yes. Exactly. That somehow it's going to reflect negatively on you to make the request. And so I think we're still coming up against that on all sorts of fronts. And so don't want to diminish that, there was a reason, I'm sure, multiple reasons why those requests weren't coming. And so, part of, I think, our work with women leaders of the world is how to create spaces where everybody is there for that. Like the global advisors are there for that. The other leaders that are in the program are there for that. That it's really clear that you should not be expected to do it by yourself.
Well, it's interesting because now, in looking back, there was support out there. I didn't know how to ask for it. Yeah. And one of the things I often look back, it's why I do the work I do now, is because I have made all the mistakes. And so I now see, if I had taken the risk to ask for help, help would be there. If I had taken the risk to admit that I didn't know something, I mean, I do remember early on calling one of my unofficial advisors to say, I totally understand how much money it's going to take to rent pianos for this opera company, but in order to print the brochure, they want $3,000. Is that a lot or not? Yeah. And, and for them to say, oh yeah, $3,000, that's a really good price. You're getting a deal. But not knowing how to fit that into the budget, because I'd never done that part.
Yeah.
It's one of the things, it keeps on going. And one of the things that I learned running the Tyrolean Opera program was that ultimately I left it for really good reasons, but I learned a lot about being a boss.
Yeah.
And those were the things that I now see, the conversations that we're having nowadays, years later, about women's empowerment and learning to ask for help, makes me then recognize, that was me. That's what I didn't do. And I didn't have an advisor such as the global advisors who would say, no, it's okay. Ask for help. Get a coach, hire somebody. It's actually okay. I think sometimes in the corporate world that comes along, but often not. Or often it's there, but women don't dare ask because they're afraid it will show them as weak.
Yeah.
So I highly recommend anybody who doesn't know about how women lead, you should absolutely pay attention and find Patricia, because she's been through all those pieces herself. You too. I don't know if you made all the mistakes that I did, but I imagine you made a few.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yes. Patricia, thank you so very much for this. The whole point of doing the themed interviews that I've started doing this year, is to have people who are experts who just happen to fit with the theme of the month. So I will certainly be replaying this elsewhere during the month, talking about how to reach out. I guess what we've talked about mostly today is how to ask for help. If somebody's listening, what should they do first? What would be the first thing you would have somebody do who says, oh, they're talking to me? Where do you start?
Well, a few different things. One is that we do at How Women Lead, we do an ecosystem call every single month. So it's usually it's on our website. It's usually the second Tuesday of the month. And it's just an hour to get to know the organization. Really, we spend time in there encouraging folks to get to know each other. Because I think, again, that's the piece that's the magic, is how do we get connected to one another? How do you find your tribe? Because if someone is a senior leader in an organization, whether it's nonprofit or corporate, or, chances are that, they're at a place where they're, wanting to be connected with like-minded folks.
Yes.
Because what happens is you're just so hunkered down in the work for so long that you've kind of lost some of that capacity to network outside of your system. And so I would say come to an ecosystem call. We have robust events, was a big piece of that. I think what stands How Women Lead apart to me is always about the heart. It's about this idea that, we are, what does it mean to really be committed to one another's success? What does it mean to really say helping each other? And to hold that. So I would say just come, come and be a
And
part.
now that it's a global organization, you don't have to be local. And that's actually one of the things that the pandemic has done for us all, is make groups like How Women Lead. Well, there is no group like How Women Lead, but How Women Lead has been a great benefit for me, for my business. And I have seen so many other people blossom through the things that How Women Lead teaches, and this community of strong women. So, Patricia, muchas gracias. Thank you so very much. We've known each other for quite some time, and I'm really, really happy to have finally gotten you as a guest on Speakers Who Get Results. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth.
I will be putting all her information into the show notes. And meanwhile, this has been Speakers Who Get Results. If you enjoyed this, please rate us on Apple Podcasts. That's the rating system that matters. I've recently learned that. Subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe to us. There are so many other really great experts that I've been able to get on the podcast. Please enjoy this. Tell your friends. And this is the way you can get the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, and I'll see you on the next one.
We have just concluded another great episode of Speakers Who Get Results with your host, Elizabeth Bachman. If you got value from today's episode, please feel free to share us with your friends and colleagues. You may also visit elizabethbachman.com for additional resources. Be sure to tune in every week for new episodes, and thanks for tuning in.